I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the willGather podcast. According to Harvard Business Review, there are about 65 million Americans that are part of this large group of people who provide 80% of long-term care in our country. And as the Harvard Business Review mentions, most of us don't even identify ourselves as a caregiver. We're just being good daughters, sons, mothers. And in this large group of people, we are just family members and friends and people that are caring for other people. It is not our formal job title necessarily. Caregivers are missing up to 6.6 workdays per year. That is less productivity. That is turnover. There are so many things that are happening at this moment. Not only that, we are not supporting people that are caring for our older adults when they need it most. What if companies could ease this burden? What are some of the options to make the caregiving journey a little bit easier? Today, we talk with Marie Gress. She is the CEO of Kovir, LLC. They are a social enterprise that helps aging sector organizations increase their capacity and impact. She is also a licensed master level social worker with specialties in macro practice and older adults. She's going to continue to share about her and the work that she does, but we're so happy she's here with us today to talk about this important topic. Here is my conversation with Marie. Hi, Marie. Thank you so much for having this important conversation with me. I think it is so vital and so necessary that we talk about how our employers and the workforce supporting the caregiver and what we can look for in that caregiver-friendly environment. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Nicole.
We met, gosh, was it like a month or two ago? We had a really
Yeah,
good
something like that.
conversation. I think I'm like time runs together now. I can't
It
quite
really
tell.
does.
It does. And we talked about so many things, but when you talked about this could be something that is important to dialogue about, I completely agree. And I think it's coming up even more now. And we'll get into all of the details about that. But first, tell us about yourself. How did you get to this place where you created your own company, and tell us what that is?
Yeah, thanks. So I am a licensed macro social worker, and macro social work is this kind of systems level thinking. Sometimes you find us in management of nonprofits, consulting. Sometimes you find us in places where there's policy or things like that. But instead of the typical social worker doing one-on-one therapy or counseling, case management, I do that on thinking on a larger systems kind of scale. So I'm a licensed macro social worker with specialties in older adults and technology. I directed aging services at my local senior center for 6 years prior to starting this work. Initially, actually, when we started, it was funny. We started with grant writing and web design. Both of those just it's really bizarre to hear a social worker say grant writing and web design, but that's what we did. Grant writing grew into some project management, it grew into strategy, and then on the other hand, website grew into some branding and communications. We actually can sell some equipment and other things like that. Over the pandemic, we have had the wonderful opportunity of working with some community-based organizations that are really trying to build out how do we engage our older adults? How do we engage our caregivers and things of that nature? And that's really at the heart of what Kovir wants to be doing. So Kovir LLC is a leading company for increasing capacity and impact with aging sector businesses, nonprofits, entrepreneurs, governments, etc. And we made virtual senior centers. And some of this work I'm going to talk about today is work that we did with our local area agency on aging around some caregiver initiatives that they got funded, um, especially in light of some of this research that's been coming out by the NEBGH, AARP, Roslin Institute, lots and lots of research happening with that growing population. And yeah, I'm excited to share some of that with you today.
Yeah, I am so happy that you're able to do that. And from your perspective, explaining that macro piece gives us a picture of you're looking at whole processes and systems, which is what we're trying to tackle with this issue right now, which is so important. And how many people are in a position of working and caregiving at the same time? What are the numbers with things like that?
Yeah, so when we talk about caregivers in general, we're looking at about 40 million
Wow.
caregivers, which is over 16% of the US's population. Over 16% of our population are informal caregivers. So I'm not even talking about direct care providers. These are relatives, these are family members, friends, neighbors, daughters, sons, spouses, etc. And caregivers really are, this informal caregiver group really is diverse. They're coming from every age, gender, socioeconomic status, racial and ethnic group, etc. So when we look at how many people who are working are caregivers, back in 2012, Gallup found that it was 1 in 6 American workers are informal caregivers. And that was 2012.
Yeah.
We can for sure know that that number is a little bit higher, that is higher now. One of the other studies I was looking at, I don't have that reference in front of me, but they were saying that 25% of these informal caregivers are millennials. And while you could be a millennial who is working as a stay-at-home mom, a lot of millennials are at the age range where they are still working. We're not retired yet. I'm a millennial. We're not we are engaged in the workforce. And so if 1 out of 4 informal caregivers are millennials, then that just speaks to how many there are working in the American workplace.
So many. Do you feel like this is a conversation that's not being talked about as much as it should be? Are we moving in that direction of creating more awareness around it?
I think we're starting to move in a direction of more awareness. We have some really great funders, philanthropists out there who are funding research in this area, which is super helpful. In order to have good advocacy around it, you have to have numbers that people can chew on and digest and want to see improve in some of those metrics. So I know Roslin Institute they're pretty much all caregiving. AARP has a higher focus on it now. And as we look at this age group, having older adults in general, just building this momentum, that I think the numbers for 2050 were like 48 to 80 million adults are going to be older adults, with most of those being 80 plus. So just with how big our aging population is, I think people are really starting to be like, oh, we really should be paying attention to this more. We really do need to be thinking about this more. And it was really only in the last couple of years that I've heard talk around how do we support caregivers in the workplace.
Well, it's proving to be, it's having a lot of impact, not only on the caregiver themselves, but the workplace. What are some of those things that happen? It's really understanding if we don't make certain adjustments, companies are going to be behind the curve in the social movement of supporting this generation before us.
Yeah. So when you think about a caregiver who has to provide care with they estimate 24 hours a week, a person is providing care. And hopefully they're getting 8 hours of sleep every night. And so that really does start to edge into some of their workplace. So caregivers tend to be absent a little bit more. They tend to struggle with some loss in productivity. They are feeling burnt out of their job and their responsibilities, and that causes them to disengage and just not be happy with where they're at. They could decide to leave their job. So you could see some employers with higher turnover. This is mostly thinking about caregivers who are in a place that's not caregiver friendly, right? If your employer is caregiver friendly, you're probably not quite experiencing it like this because your employer is supporting you, which we see have a ton of benefits, right? Your employees are less absent. Your employees are just as productive, if not more productive. We actually see employers save significantly on insurance costs. One of the stats I had found for our conversation today was that employers who are not caregiver friendly typically lose, or employers as a whole typically lose $38 billion a year.
Wow.
$38 billion a year because they're paying more in healthcare. They're paying for that staff turnover. They are paying more for that lost productivity, lost sales, lost movement in those areas. And so employers really do, that's the strategy that we take when we're talking to the employers directly, you know, like this is the number. This is what you are losing out on. Like, not only are you losing out on an amazing employee, which I wish was more of a selling point to them, but as a business, this is the cost of not paying attention to your people. This is the cost of not prioritizing, I guess I should say. This is the cost of not prioritizing the people who work for you.
They're real numbers, which you can see a clear picture of how then it really affects not only your business, but the bottom line. We hope that it would be just based on, we don't want to lose these awesome people that are working here, but I think it does help to have those stats behind it. And caregiver side, just the mental energy that it takes to worry about being in two places at once. I need to help mom, but I've got a meeting at 8, or I need that financial security, but I also need to be here because they're not safe alone. So it's the intensity of carrying the weight of some of those choices.
Yeah, and like you think about waiting for the doctor's call. You know, there's a surgery, a procedure coming up. They call you the day before. You don't know what time they're going to call, but you don't want to miss that call. That's not one you can miss. And so your brain, is just stuck in these two places. And we like to think that we are multitaskers as part of the human race, but that's not actually something our brain is very good at, bouncing between or thinking about two things at once. Our brain cannot actually do that.
Right. What toll does it take on a caregiver to have a workplace that's not caregiver friendly?
Yeah, so really for them, it comes down to burnout. When a caregiver is working for a place that is not caregiver friendly, they start thinking twice about when they need to ask off for time because they're afraid that will look like they're less part of the team. They're afraid that they are going to miss out on the next project. This next project that they're going to release, my boss is going to hand out, like this could be the one that gets us a promotion. And I'm afraid to ask off for time right now because I want that job to prove that I'm good enough. But you end up getting passed over for a lot of those opportunities because you have to work a more flexible schedule, or you're fighting with your boss about it. You're using up your time, your PTO time more quickly. And then that PTO time is used for taking care of someone else, not actually taking care of yourself. So there's just lots and lots of things that makes it very hard for a caregiver, and really all of it boils down to burnout. They're not able to take care of themselves emotionally, physically, and that's got to go somewhere.
Yeah, it does. If we're looking at places of employment, how can we identify if they're caregiver friendly? What does that term mean?
Yeah, we're working on figuring out how to define that more clearly. At this point, I recommend caregivers to really think about what they need. Every caregiving situation is a little bit different. And so you may need more flexibility in your schedule. You may need to request for working from home, doing some remote work. You may be looking for a different way to spend your vacation, holiday, PTO. Maybe you want to spend that differently. Maybe you are asking for a flex in how some of those benefits work. And so until until we have good policies in place for HRs to adopt, and for, I mean, hopefully for states to adopt as part of protections to workers. Um, I really challenge caregivers to think about what are my needs and how can I ask for them? How can I make that part of the negotiating process? If you are someone looking for work, I would try to reach out to people who already work at that place. So that may mean going on site and talking to a couple employees, asking if you can speak to a few people. It might be going on LinkedIn and looking up that company and seeing who works for them and sending them a message, asking if you can ask them a few questions. So you can do some of that research yourself. But what we're finding too is while there are policies that your workplace can adopt that is more caregiver friendly, just like diversity, equity, inclusion, it really comes down to the culture. How do people actually feel about it? How will your boss actually evaluate you? How will your boss actually give out assignments? It really comes down to that culture. And to get to the bottom of that, you have to ask some good questions. So if you're looking at jobs, talking to people who already work there, if you are being interviewed, be really intentional with the questions you're asking HR, and even asking them about the benefits you know you are going to need, that flexibility you know that you're going to need. The hesitation usually is that if I ask for something like PTO or if I ask for flexible time, they might not even give me the job. And I would say, is that a job you want then? Is that actually something, a workplace you want to start getting adjusted to and struggle with for the next however many years you're going to be providing care?
Yeah, better to see what that looks like beforehand versus when you're already in it.
And while that may mean a missed potential job now, you are going to be much happier and healthier in the long run if you can find an employer who is willing to work with you and willing to adapt their culture to whatever you as their employee needs to get the best work done.
Historically, would you say that when people think of resources that workplaces provide, it would fall under that FMLA or that Family Medical Leave Act?
Right.
But what is not always known is that that is time off where you're legally can have that time off, but it's not always paid. And that's where the burden
Correct.
comes in.
Correct. For a lot of these positions that people end up taking, they're not positions that pay well enough to go unpaid for 12 weeks,
Right.
or whatever that period. I think it's 12 weeks, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Like 3 months, 12 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. And what we know about American spending habits and saving habits is that we usually don't have enough saved up. What we also know about caregiving is that there's usually they estimate $7,000 a caregiver is spending on caregiving expenses on their own. So here you are taking some time off when maybe you don't have enough saved and you're still spending that extra. And that adds even more stress to an already stressful situation.
The call to workplaces or employers is to think about this, really think about becoming a caregiver friendly environment, not only in policy, but in culture, what should they think about? What resources should be in place? Where's a good place for them to start?
Yeah, I am a big fan of the empathy trainings.
Mm-hmm.
Get somebody who knows the caregiver landscape, get somebody who knows what it's like to be a caregiver, somebody who knows all of those things and is willing to talk about it, talk to your
Mm-hmm.
employees about it. What we find with a lot of DE&I work is that when you have a real person and their real stories being shared, when people can be more open about their experiences, that's where legitimate growth and understanding happen. And that's when we start seeing culture change happen in these workplaces, is when staff can see how what they are saying is impacting somebody else. It's really hard to step outside of your own shoes sometimes and to see how someone else is seeing it. And caregivers, and rightly so, are very timid about sharing their caregiver status with their other employees and peers, employers and peers. And so having someone from the outside come in and share what it's like and be able to ask or answer questions can be really beneficial, especially if you're starting to think about what are some policies we might want to have in place, what sort of changes do we want to have in place. It would be really helpful to include caregivers in on that conversation, ideally people who are within your company, but again, you might not know of any because they're too timid to say anything. So bringing on some outside people. Empathy training is really a great place to start. But also, looking at some of their other practices. Is there something you actually have in place around assigning projects? It really depends. It really depends on your workplace, on what projects means and how projects get assigned, how tasks get assigned. But what makes you eligible for promotion? If you're an agency that makes dings against people for every time they're late, a caregiver is going to have a lot of those dings and they're not going to be able to get promoted within your system. If you have something that is based on outcomes, that's generally a better way to do a lot of business and promotion anyways, but that also can really benefit caregivers because they can do really great work. They can do amazing work. They just have to do it in a different workflow than other employees. And so making some of those shifts and even how you do evaluation and assignments can make a big impact in your organization.
I really like how you talked about pulling the caregiver into that conversation of what do they actually need in that environment, because different workplace environments bring about different needs. And so looking at what is unique to what you do and how your company can support that. How does all of this then benefit the caregiver if they're in this environment?
Yeah. So one of my favorite organizations that offers wonderful caregiver support is Blue Cross of Blue Shield, North Carolina. So I have talked to a whole bunch of caregivers working for all types of agencies, even ones that they've created themselves, right? But in this particular instance, the employee who worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina said that not only do they offer remote work for any parent or caregiver who needs it, flexible time for any parent or caregiver who needs it. They offer support groups to parents and caregivers. They know that these are really stressful times in someone's life, and so they want, particularly caregivers, to be able to talk with one another. So they have a caregiver support group twice a month. Once a month is just peer-to-peer. People are talking, sharing, taking turns facilitating the group. And the other time a month, they have an educational component. So someone might come in and speak more about dementia. Someone might come in and speak more about guardianship, about long-term care or how to pay for those things. And the list goes on. So something educational. And we've seen caregiver support groups be such a huge benefit to caregivers when especially an employer is able to offer something like that. Caregivers feel like they are supported in the work that they're doing. They feel valued by their company. They're more likely to say, this is who I work for. Aren't they great?
Yeah.
And so not only are they happier and producing really good work, they're staying with the company much, much longer, which we know is also really good for companies. But in their home lives, they're happier. They're able to deal with tensions in their families. They're able to deal with stress better. They're able to handle some of these things better than their counterparts because they're just in a better mental and physical space, right? The other thing I really liked that they were offering that this woman said was, I will stay here for as long as I'm a caregiver because this is huge. But for their parents and caregivers, they offer 15 days of emergency respite.
Wow.
Incredible.
Right? Yeah.
Right? So if your babysitter, if you have children, if your babysitter can't come, if you are a caregiver to a loved one and your paid caregiver doesn't show up for the day or calls in sick or any of these things, they have a program for you to use 15 days of no additional cost respite. It does not cost you anything additional. If you want to go away for a weekend, if you want to do any of those things, they are supporting you. And that is such a huge thing to have your employer care about that level of your personhood is just amazing. That's one of my favorites. And everyone was so jealous when she was telling us that in our focus group.
Sure. Yes. Ask the question of, do you offer these benefits? As the more workplaces hear that there's that need and people are looking for that benefit, they might be more likely to act on that.
Oh, most definitely. And especially right now when the person being hired, it has such power, right? Because places everywhere are looking for workers. They're giving huge sign-on bonuses for workers. You as a worker have a lot of power right now, way more than I could ever remember. And now is a great time to use that. If you offer me this benefit, I would be happy to work for you. I'm sorry you don't offer this. I'm going to continue looking for somebody who does. Now is a great time to take that own personal advocacy for yourself.
Yeah, and also looking at the older adult themselves, I know have some benefits that could benefit the caregiver in terms of, and we'll have to fact check this, but I believe it's Humana or Medicare Advantage. There is a service called Papa, which if you've heard of
yes,
that, join
I've
Papa.
heard of Papa.
Yeah, I did an interview with Andrew Parker. Gosh, as a 9 months ago, maybe. Anyways, that can be a part of those benefits and really utilizing that ask the question, those services are available because that, especially with Papa, can really support the caregiver and ease some of that burden as well as the older adult and that intergenerational connection. Yeah.
Yeah. We talk about EAP services sometimes, employee assistant programs, and they often have some sort of counselor, someone for you to talk to on a short basis. But if your employer uses something like Papa, that is incredible. Definitely something to use.
Right, encouraging people to be the advocate for themselves and ask the question. And
yeah, because sometimes your HR department doesn't even know. It's not something that anyone has ever asked to use. And so, yeah, just asking could open up opportunities for everybody.
Right.
And so I guess one other thing to note is just on talking to your employer about, if you're a caregiver, talking to your employer about the benefits that they could offer, even if you're not a caregiver. Sometimes people haven't used some of the benefits an employer offers for so long that HR doesn't even remember that it exists, or it's a new HR person, so they didn't know that it exists. And so just by asking and having them do some of that research for you on what's available can open up opportunities for everyone in your company to have this additional support. Because while caregivers really need a lot of this support, what we're talking about today, other people are going through lots of other things that could also benefit from, say, an employee assistance program, talking to a counselor, talking to someone like Papa, or maybe just that knowing Papa exists and being able to tell somebody else about it. It can really open up this wonderful sets of opportunities. So just by asking a couple of questions to your HR can be really beneficial. And on the flip side, if you work for an HR department, to make sure you know what is available and make sure you are asking your employees to use these services that are available. Sometimes employees, regardless of caregiver status, are nervous about asking to use something, but this is what your company has to offer them to make sure that they're taking care of themselves and staying with your company for as long as possible. So there's sort of this dual relationship that could really blossom into something great.
Yeah.
If we just ask the right question.
That's such good advice. I hope people do that. So much good could come out of it in both ways. Where can we learn more about you and Kovir? I love directing people to really great resources and information. And where can we find you?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, Kovir LLC does capacity and impact work with the aging sector. So you could be a nonprofit, business, a professional, an individual. We love to work with you. We love to do networking and development, all of that stuff. Really, the best place to go is our website, reading a little bit more about what might be interest to you, but then you can jump on one of our calendars. My team loves to talk to people directly. There's lots of work and needs out there, and so we like to figure out how we can best help you as an individual or an individual agency. And so by going to our website and finding one of our calendars, that's really the best way to get connected.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Marie. I have learned so much from our conversation, and I am hopeful that we are moving in the right direction so that we're going to see so many workplaces, big companies adopt this being caregiver friendly, and it'll be the new norm. That's my hope.
Yeah, I am forever optimistic. So that is my hope as well. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, thank you so much. And now time for an ad break. So I have to tell you about my friend Jimmy Zolo and his new company, Joe and Bella. Our paths had crossed, and I'm so glad that they did. Jimmy is passionate about older adults. He told me that after both of his grandparents moved into a care community, his family's world has turned upside down, and they really became caregivers overnight. As you know, being a caregiver to someone close to you can be overwhelming, and there's so much to manage, like making sure your loved one has all of the products they need, keeping things stocked when things run out. And Jimmy's family also had that same problem. They were scrolling through all of these product reviews online, unsure what would be the best to purchase. It can be really time consuming and frustrating, and he wished there was a simpler way to shop for his grandparents. Jimmy decided to launch his own business to solve this problem. He founded Joe and Bella to make shopping for older adults simple. They carry everything from comfy shoes to creative gifts, even toiletries that can automatically be reordered, and technology that makes caregiving easier. And what I love, and I know you guys will too, is that each and every product on Joe and Bella has been carefully selected by caregiving experts. Jimmy is giving an exclusive offer to listeners of this podcast. You can use promo code GATHER to receive 10% off your first purchase at joeandbella.com. That code is GATHER WillGather for 10% off at joeandbella.com. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.